camera. Let me bring the screen to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? Thanks for joining this session again. Thank you for being a part of this virtual conference. Welcome to tHRive, the Transformational HR Program. Trust the day has been going very well. Let me see, who do we have here? Thank you for joining. How are you doing? Bernard, Ejiro, Judith, Obaseki, Okpayemi, you're all welcome. Thank you for joining the second session for today. You're welcome, Bernard. Thank you very much. And for those joining on YouTube live stream, thank you for joining. You're as much a part of this conference as the people here on Zoom. Thank you for always participating as well and sharing your thoughts during the sessions. This session, we're going to be looking at a practical guide to crafting HR strategy for small and growing businesses. A particularly important topic, especially for those that work in what is popularly called one-man business. We've had so many questions on that. It is like this, I work here and it's one-man business, this. I think we'll get a lot of answers from this session with this practical guide on how we can craft our HR strategy to mitigate against some of the things that we've been asking questions about since the beginning of this conference. So hopefully we're going to get some insights here, definitely, from our speaker today, Bubemi Atimomo. I'll be introducing him shortly and then handing over to him. He's on standby. Really expectant, looking forward to this particular topic and what will be shared here to answer some of the pressing issues that a lot of us are facing in our organizations. Just giving a couple of more seconds for more people to join, and then we'll go full steam and into the session. Thank you for joining Oluwayemi C. Opayemi Peter, you're welcome. All right. Okay, let's meet our speaker for today, Bubemi Atimomo. I hope I got the pronunciation right. Don't worry, you correct me when you come up. Bubemi is an astute HR and business consultant, trainer, and entrepreneurship advocate with considerable experience in consulting, human resources, and enterprise development. He is a certified senior professional in human resources international SPHRI, senior certified professional by the Society for Human Resource Management, that's SHRIM, and holds a certificate in strategic human resources practices from Cornell University, USA. He has an MSc in entrepreneurship and innovation from the University of Essex, UK, and obtained his first degree in forest resources management from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. So from managing forest resources to managing human resources. His professional career has spanned working with localgiving.com, one of the UK's foremost not-for-profit social enterprises, as a project research consultant, BJL PLC as head human resources, and as a senior consultant at Human Capacity Development Consultant, HCDC Limited, an HR consulting and people development firm where he began his career. He also provides consulting support for a number of programs at the Enterprise Development Center of the Pan-Atlantic University, Lagos. He is currently the managing consultant at Business in Tandem Limited, an organizational management advisory firm that works with growing businesses to optimize their human resources and ensure alignment with their overall business strategy. Let's give a warm tHRive welcome to Bubemi Atimomo, who will be speaking on a practical guide to crafting HR strategy for small and growing businesses. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you for accepting our invitation and sharing your time and knowledge with us here.
It's my pleasure. Okay, so let me just quickly share my slides. Okay, so today we'll be talking about crafting HR strategy, and I've narrowed it, well, not exactly narrowed it down. I thought it was important to emphasize how that comes to play in small and growing businesses. I realized that, a lot of the businesses that we have in Nigeria are really small and growing businesses. And many times, people don't think that some of the world-class principles apply to them or can be successfully executed in them because they don't see themselves as being that kind of company. But the reality is the principles are the same, irrespective of whether it's a large firm or it's a small firm. So if there's anyone on the webinar today who doesn't work for a small or a growing business, works for a structured large business, the principles are still the same. I just wanted to emphasize that these things still apply to small and growing businesses. It might slightly, slant towards that angle, but like I said again, the principles are still the same. Okay, so what do I expect that we will all learn today? We'll be looking at the importance of HR strategy to an organization, how to align that HR strategy with organizational strategy, and then how HR strategy impacts on our daily HR practices. Here's the outline. So I'm going to first of all start off by talking about the SME sector in Nigeria. We dovetail into talking about strategy, HR strategy in organization, and then we'll focus on the meat of the matter, which is crafting HR strategy. And as you can see, it considers it in two aspects. I'll explain a bit about that. And then we'll wrap up by taking a company to review. Now, I haven't exactly called it a case study because the information that I will present is based on assumption. So I've called it company review. It's a company that we all know, and we'll just look at how the company's business strategy has changed over the years, and I'll present some of my assumptions as regards the kind of HR strategy they've had to deploy. Now, these assumptions are based on things that I have observed as an outsider looking at the company, and also, having done some work for the company in the past. So as part of my work, I serve small and growing businesses. And small and growing businesses typically are, in terms of number, companies that have less than 50 employees. Some of them are new companies. Some of them might be old but have never had any structure. Some of them are still struggling within their business industry sector. And if there's one thing that I've realized over the years, is the fact that many leaders of these firms don't really think HR is important. So they've existed without having an HR personnel, for example, or without having any concrete plans towards, addressing their HR issues. So in some cases, the MD is the one who still does recruitment and, gets on to do the training. The accountant is the one who does the payroll. They probably don't even do any training. What is succession planning? What is competency development? All of those things don't even come into play. Now, this is largely because for them, it's about what's the value I can get now. I need to make money. How can I make that money? So they tend to channel all their resources into the areas that they believe will give them the most immediate value. So areas like finance, sales, and marketing typically get the greater focus of their attention. But then in reality, if you look at it, who handled HR, who handled finance, who handled marketing? What are the components of all those things? It's still people. And, it's important for them to give as much thought to their people affairs as they give to all of these things. Perhaps if they turn the tables and then looked at people first, maybe they might achieve, or they might quickly achieve the kind of success that they anticipate faster. However, discerning business leaders now realize the importance of HR and ensuring it supports the organizational strategy. So like I said, as part of my work, I have to sell this service to companies. So I typically work with companies who have maybe less than averagely 30 employees. Some of them don't have an HR personnel at all, and HR services are farmed out. The HR services that they consider essential are farmed out across people. Some of them have somebody who just manage HR. The person doesn't have HR skills, doesn't have HR experience, or the person just knows that they are, handling the HR functions. Now, some cases, it's not necessary an HR personnel might not have a full-time role in that organization. So if you look at an organization that has just 10 employees, an HR person having an HR person full-time, might be a waste of resources because the person's work would get exhausted very quickly. So part of the solution that I provide is taking that on and helping them structure till they do actually need an HR if they eventually get to that point. So let's look at it in terms of SMEs. Which companies can we say are the SMEs? Now, according to SMEDAN, which is the Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency of Nigeria, enterprises that employ below 200 persons qualify as SMEs. Now, we also have that further split into MSMEs. So you have micro businesses, micro enterprises, small enterprises, medium scale enterprises. And for the purposes of this, the differential for us will be in terms of the number of people that they have. So micro enterprises typically have 10 employees or less. Small enterprises typically have 50 employees or less, while the medium enterprises, have, 50 to 200. Now, the total number of enterprises in Nigeria was estimated at 41.5 million, spread out across 36 states in the country. Now, if we notice, micro enterprises constitute 99.8% of that number. So of the 41.5 million, we have micro enterprises practically taking up, that number, and that's for companies that have less than 10 employees. Now, small businesses make up 0.17%, and medium enterprises just make up a small amount of that number. You can see that most of the businesses that we have in operation are micro enterprises and one-man businesses. Just one handling the affairs, dictating the instructions and how the company operates. Now, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers in Nigeria and its Nigeria SME Survey report, the SME sector is the backbone of major developed economies. It's as well as important, it's an important contributor to employment, economic and export growth. Now, if we see countries like America, for example, it's been touted that SMEs hold up the economy of America. The same can be alluded to here, but how many of those companies have the kind of structure that SMEs abroad have? Now, SMEs contribute almost 50% to our national GDP. You can imagine if SMEs were a lot more structured, they could probably provide a lot more contributions to GDP. And then when we also look at it in terms of the structure, the opportunities that SMEs have to be able to employ more people, we can see that our unemployment problem might be solved if we address the MSME sector. So the SME sector in Nigeria is strategically positioned to absorb up to 80% of jobs, improve per capita income, increase value addition to raw material supply, improve export earnings, enhance capacity utilization in key industries, and unlock economic expansion and GDP growth. Now, if, like I said earlier on, if a lot more focus was placed into addressing the needs of the SME sector, then they can mop up more jobs. So we can see that the slightest impact on the economy is felt in the SME sector, and these can affect things as little as the amount of jobs that they have. Now, in the SME sector, they face a number of challenges, and these are kind of challenges that impact on whether they even have a business strategy or not, whether they address HR or not. Not being well known in the marketplace as compared with more established firms is a key challenge that many of them have. So, for example, a company, playing in, let's say, marketing communication, they have only 10 employees or less, they've been around for maybe just a year, 18 months, has challenges to face in terms of hiring employees, for example, has challenges to face in terms of the kind of benefits that they can provide for their employees, because they also have issues acquiring and managing scarce resources in the market. So they cannot command the amount of resources or the kind of resources that larger firms can command. And then they still have to compete for that market share with established business firms, which have greater resources to play around with. So for example, you can imagine company A, who's been around for like 18 months, competing with company B, who's been in the market for 20 years, has greater access to resources, has a larger amount of clients that they serve, earns greater income. the disparity is large, but that doesn't mean that company A cannot eventually catch up with company B. So SMEs need to be agile and creative in the way they interact with the marketplace in order to surmount these challenges. Now, the crux of the matter is strategy. We're talking about crafting HR strategy, but we first of all have to look at strategy. So strategy is about making choices, trade-offs. It's about deliberately choosing to be different. This is a quote from Michael Porter, who is renowned for his work on competitive strategy. I'd like to also ask at this point in time, I'd like to do like a quick poll. Well, not necessarily a poll, but let me see how many of us, let me see, our opinions on strategy. What do you think? What does strategy mean to you? Just take this quick exercise. Okay, can you see that poll? Jide, is it obvious to all? Is it clear to all rather? Hello, Jide?
Yes.
Okay, I want to be sure that I'm sharing my Mentimeter screen. Is it? Can you see that? Hello?
Can I see what?
The screen I just shared, I've replaced it with a Mentimeter screen.
Yes, we can see a screen.
Okay, so I'd like everyone to just go on menti.com with your phones on your laptops and just use the code. When you open menti.com, type in the code 2133495 and just quickly provide a short answer.
You're seeing your slides here.
Oh, you're seeing my slides?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was trying to do. Okay, so I think I need to, okay, I need to share. Oh yes, sorry, I need to share that. Okay. Can you see the new screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what does strategy mean to you? I'd just like you to just go to menti.com, menti.com, and type in the code 2133495. Let's just quickly take that poll. Okay, I just need about maybe 3 to 5 responses. What does strategy mean to you? Menti.com to ask you to provide a code. So once you provide that code, you'll be able to provide your responses. The code is 2133495. Okay. I hope nobody is having an issue with that. Okay, I have one person. Strategy, say this person says strategy is a plan or a roadmap. I just need about maybe 3 to 5 responses and then we can move ahead. Okay, what you just need to do is go to menti.com, M-E-N-T-I. Okay, somebody else says action plan. menti.com and type in the code 2133495. Okay, somebody else says plan of action. Okay, 3 people now. I just need maybe like 2 more people and then we can continue. What does strategy mean to you? Okay, I think it's looking like plan is universal. Okay, just one more person and then you can continue. What does strategy mean to you? Okay, somebody says logistics. Okay, a plan. Okay, I have more people. Achieving goals. Okay, 7 people now. A detailed plan. A detailed plan for action. Okay, plan of action. Okay, plan. Okay, great. Okay, so let's continue. We have 8 responses. So if there's one thing that is common here now, a lot of people believe that strategy involves some sort of plan, a roadmap, a plan of action, a detailed plan. Planning seems to be our core thought about what strategy is. Okay. So let's go back to our slide. Okay. So strategy is a word that a lot of people throw around, people say things like, you're not being strategic. What is our strategy for this? What's our strategy for that? We should have a strategy, and it's almost, become cliche. But like many of us said, it's a plan. It's a plan to achieve one or more long-term or overall goals under conditions of uncertainty. So strategy is essentially a plan of action, like many of us have said in our poll. According to Michael Porter, it's deliberately choosing a different set of activities to deliver a unique mix of value. So why is strategy important? It highlights the direction that the organization should be heading in. Remember, I said that strategy is a plan, and a plan is simply something you use to direct yourself towards where you're going. It focuses resource management, as resources required to execute objectives are usually scarce or limited. No organization has access to all of the resources available in the world. So we need to have a strategy to enable us to know how to manage the resources that we have access to. It reviews the internal and external environment and increases the chances of one being better prepared for any eventualities. So strategy considers internal environment of the organization and also the external environment, which is the economy, the political landscape, and all of that around, and how that affects the organization. So when we talk about human resource strategy, it's not really different from the organizational strategy. It's just a plan of action, but this time it's specific to HR. So HR strategy is a long-term plan of action regarding how an organization expects its people and its people practices to align with and impact on the achievement of goals. So how do we make sure that our people practices, how do we make sure that our people support the achievement of the goals that the organization itself has set? Discerning business leaders understand that HR practices that create supportive environments for employees and strong corporate cultures can lead to superior returns for shareholders by being more innovative and efficient and productive than their peers. So basically, having a strategy is a differential. It separates you from your peers, it separates you from your competitors or potential competitors. And discerning business leaders understand that narrowing down on that HR strategy can affect how they play in their market. Having a human resource strategy increases the chances of any one of these factors occurring, providing direction for all the aspects of HR. So it's not enough for us to just say we're going to hire 2 employees this month or 2 employees this quarter. Why are we hiring that employee? Is there a reason that let's train 10 employees? Why are we training them? What are we training on? What's the best approach to training them? What's the best mode of training delivery? Those are the kind of directions that we seek through the HR strategy. Efficient resource management, I said that earlier on as well. Why are we hiring a new employee, for example? Is there somebody else that can take up part of that role? That role that you think that you need, is that a long-term role or a short-term role? Do we actually need somebody on a full-time position to handle that role? Or do we just need to get someone on contract to handle that role? A better work culture. Because the HR strategy gives direction, you end up finding out that the work culture is easier to create and predict because everybody knows what HR tries to achieve. And everybody knows what HR tries to achieve based on what the organizational strategy is. So it's easier to craft that HR strategy and provide a work culture that supports the achievement of the organizational goals. Obviously, job satisfaction would be a result of an improved work culture. And then there would also be a proactive approach to managing employees. Now, managing employees, not just from the HR person's perspective, and then it also ultimately boosts productivity. So what are some of the best practice approaches to crafting your HR strategy? Skilled HR professionals must lead the charge. You cannot afford to hand the work of deploying of designing and implementing that HR strategy to someone who does not have an HR experience or focus. Now, for a small and growing business that doesn't have an HR professional, what are the options? They can invite someone from outside to help them design that HR strategy. And they can also keep that person on to help them implement it till they can actually take on an HR person on board. It's important that management is also involved in ensuring effective implementation of that HR strategy. If management doesn't buy into it, then there's no way that HR strategy is going to succeed. It must also be developed as part of the organizational strategy. So once we know the organizational strategy, we piggyback our HR strategy to that HR strategy. It's not developing independent of that. It should consider an analysis of the internal and external environment, because HR will not exist in isolation. There are lots of things that happen externally, for example, that will affect the organization. So take, for example, COVID is something that has affected organizations across the world. It's something that wasn't really thought would happen. It's something that wasn't necessarily planned for, but then it's happened. So how do we respond to this? Now, for organizations that had an HR strategy, it would be easier for them to respond to COVID as against those who didn't have an HR strategy. It should address all HR areas and ensure HR action plans link HR strategy. I mentioned that earlier on. And then finally, the action plans developed as a result of the HR strategy should be monitored and execution measured through KPIs, because this will impact on the effectiveness of the HR strategy. So another quote on strategy from Canfield: I believe that people make their own luck by great preparation and good strategy. So there's a lot of preparation involved in the work of designing your HR strategy. And we'll look at that now as we discuss crafting your HR strategy. So the expected outcome of the HR strategy is to create a desired state for HR that supports the achievement of organizational goals. If HR is not properly structured, if HR is not properly designed to support that organizational goal, then the chances of achieving those goals would be far and greatly reduced. It is important that the HR professional understands the business he or she is operating in, because the HR strategy was developed from the business strategy. So we have a lot of HR people who are HR professionals. They know the work of HR. But how many of those people know the business that they're working in? So you're an HR professional that works in financial services, for example. Do you know what the rules and regulations regarding your sector within the financial services are? Do you understand the business of your organization? If you work in a bank, for example, do you know what credit management is about? Do you know what portfolio management is about, investment management? If you work in advertising, the key terms above the line, below the line, do you know what people do in client management, for example? Or do you know what the creatives do? So do you really understand the business that you're working in? That's very, very critical. So now, in terms of crafting the HR strategy, we're going to look at it in terms of the current state of HR and the future state of HR. So we're getting a bit more practical. There's a lot of information that will be passed across, and we just need to understand that it's a step-by-step process. So the HR professional must assess these issues to determine the current state of HR. They must conduct an overview of the company. They must benchmark organizations. They must conduct a SWOT analysis. And they must also identify the current HR trends. So let's start with the first one. Understanding the current state of the company is the very first step. And areas to review in terms of understanding the current state of the company are the company history, its size and its industry sector, its operating environment, and then a current situation analysis of HR and the organization. And then we'll take each of them one by one. So the company's history. How long has the company been in existence? When was it founded? What industry does it play in? Is it in financial services? Is it in the health sector, educational sector? What is its core business? So even if it plays in financial services, is it a bank? Is it a micro lending company? Is it a bureau de change? Is it an investment management firm? Is it a credit rating firm? You know, what exactly is its core business? And then what key information about the company is important? So for this, it's just information that may not be immediately obvious. So maybe, for example, the company started as a, let's say, a credit rating company. And eventually the company moved from credit rating to credit checks, for example. You know, what kind of phase company goes through in deciding to move from one subsector to the other sector. So the operating environment, who are the company's major competitors? It's very important because the company will not exist in isolation. These are the companies that will chase the share of business that your company will also chase. So who are those companies? Now, it's not enough for us to know the major competitors. Who are the potential competitors? So it's possible that there are companies that are dancing around your sector, you know, playing around your sector. They might not necessarily be playing in your sector yet, but you can see from some of the moves that they are making that there's a potential for them to encroach into your sector. You also need to know who those competitors are. Which markets do they serve? Markets in terms of location, markets in terms of demographics, you know, who do they address in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of location. These are things that you need to factor in. Who are its customers? Narrow it down to the barest minimum as possible. So if you are a school, for example, if you're working at the educational sector and, you know, you work in a school, what kind of school is it? You know, is it a school that has just a primary section, or does it have a secondary arm as well? Or, you know, or is it just a second section? You know, the kind of decisions that you take, the kind of information that you take will be greatly impacted discerning what kind of school exactly it is. And then, is it a public school, for example? Is it a private school? You know, even if it's a private school, is it a private school that follows strictly, let's say, the YX syllabus, or do they also have like a Cambridge A-level syllabus as well? Who are the stakeholders? So who are the people that get impacted by your business? And this is not just in terms of using the school as an example, not in terms of the students or their parents, but also in terms of, you know, the Ministry of Education, which is a stakeholder, the community that the school is located in, which are also stakeholders. And then which agencies regulate its activities? Also using that example of the school, the Ministry of Education would be the one regulating the activities of the school. Now we look at a current situation analysis of HR and the organization, and then I've split this into two. So for the organization, when we say current situation analysis, sorry, I need to clarify that. What state is HR in at that point? What state is the organization in at that point? So for the organization, how many operational locations are there? Is there just one location, you know, which is the head office? Or are there branches within the state that you're in, or branches outside of that state within the country, or branches outside of the country within the sub-region, or branches outside of the continent? Is there an organogram? How are business functions organized? So, you know, are functions organized according to teams, for example, or according to departmental structures? Is there a project environment within the organization? Which leadership functions are present and which are not? So for every organization, there's definitely the managing director, you know, but do you have someone who handles finance? Do you have someone who handles HR? have someone who handles accounting, marketing. How many and which units, departments, directorates exist? So based on the functions that exist, you can now narrow down to find out which of these units or departments or directorates exist within the company. Now, looking at human resources, the first question is there even an HR department? Now, for many small businesses, obviously the question would be that there's no HR department. So if there's no HR department and there are employees within the organization, how have the functions of HR been handled? So that's what we realized, for example, that maybe the MD is the one who, does the hiring and firing. So he has to be the one to look for candidates or do the interviews, who will print the offer letters, send out the offer letters, is the one who will do the onboarding for new staff, or you find out that the accountant is the one that handles payroll, or somebody who, just handles maybe admin, is saddled with the responsibility of HR. So who has been handling the HR functions? Which HR functions are active and which are not? So when we look at this, we say, for example, typically in every organization, because you need new employees, recruitment would be an active function. Because employees need to earn salary, payroll management would be an active function. So typically, these are the two most active functions, recruitment and payroll management. But then there are other functions that are critical to the business. What are those functions that are not active? So for example, training may be semi-active or not active. Succession planning, for example, would not be active. There are lots of other HR areas, and I'll provide a list of that as well as we go along. How many staff are there in the business? How are the staff spread across locations? Are they all in that one location? Or if you have more than one location, how are they spread across locations? What are they doing in those locations? What are their roles? What responsibilities do they have? Who are they responsible for within the organization? What is your staff profile like in terms of knowledge, skills, attitudes? When you see your employees, can you say that there's a uniformity in terms of the kind of knowledge you expect them to have, or the kind of skills that you expect them to have, or the attitude that they should have and express? Now, so as an outcome of this investigation, when we sit down and ask ourselves these questions and document the information that we have, we then say, let's analyze the state of various HR areas. So we have to analyze these HR areas in depth. But before we go on, let me just put another poll. So I want to find out how many HR areas. What are your top 3 HR areas? Okay, so let's do that very quickly. Still the same website, still the same code, menti.com 2133495. What are your top 3 HR areas? So I've mentioned recruitment, I've mentioned training. What other HR areas do you know? Okay. Who will be our first respondent? What are your top 3 HR areas? Okay, still the same website, menti.com, menti.com, and then the code 2133495. Okay, so our first respondent is performance management, learning and development, recruitment. Okay, which other ones? Which other ones do we have? The beautiful thing about this Mentimeter tool is that, as people begin to respond, you can tell which responses are more common by looking at which characters appear the largest. So if more and more people answered performance management, for example, you see that performance management begins to grow larger, exactly as we have now. Okay, so somebody else has added task management, another performance management. Okay, employee welfare, compensation and benefits, okay, employee engagement, okay. So performance management seems to be the top one for many people. What other areas do we have? I know that it's not just performance management or learning and development, talent management. There are other HR areas that we would be conversant with. So I just need maybe like 2 more people to respond, and then we can go back to our slides. Okay. What's the new one? Payroll management. Okay, I see payroll management has joined the mix. Okay, seems like maybe my internet or something. Okay, can you hear me? Hello, Jide? Okay, I just need to be sure that. Okay, let me check the chat. I just need to be sure that. Okay, so I'm audible. Okay, sorry about that. Maybe my internet connection or something. Okay, so yeah. So we need to analyze the state of various HR areas. The next slide, I've listed some examples of HR areas. And basically what we're doing is an in-depth analysis to find out the state of these HR areas within the organization. So for example, I have a list of 5 here. Recruitment, how is recruitment done? Who handles recruitment? How does recruitment even start? What are the processes that are followed through in recruiting employees? Do they even have job descriptions or person specifications that support the recruitment process? Who handles it? What are the stages that the organization adopts in recruiting people? For training as well, how is training done? Do they have a training plan? From the training plan, how do they even involve the training budget? Do they even have a training budget? Who handles training? How do they select training? Do they even start at all with a training needs analysis? Performance management, the same thing. How do they handle performance management? Is the focus just on appraisal, or do they have a comprehensive performance management structure that they follow? Are there, outcomes of performance? How are those outcomes handled? So these are the various questions that we ask ourselves. So it's basically sitting down with each HR area and asking ourselves questions to find out the current state of that HR area within the organization. And I've just provided a sample list of some HR areas as well. So here we have manpower planning, onboarding, HR policies and processes, reward management, grievances and disciplinary measures, HR costs, corporate culture assessment and development, change management, employee records and data administration, employee communication. So these are just some areas that we can also look at when we're determining the current state of HR in that organization. Now, the next step to assessing the current state of HR as a means towards crafting an HR strategy is to benchmark organizations. I said earlier at some point that we as an organization, the organization would not exist in a vacuum. There are competitors that it has to play with, it has to fight with for resources and access to market. So it's good to find out what some of these your competitors are doing. You can use them to benchmark your HR practices. And they don't necessarily even have to be your competitors. They could be companies that you admire that play in a different space, but you find that there may be complementary issues and there may be things that you can learn from them. So basically what you're going to do is to research the selected organizations in terms of these three areas: their HR philosophy and practices. So what beliefs guide their HR functions? What have they focused on as their HR strategy? How is their HR function organized? What does their ideal employee look like? These are just sample areas that we can look at in terms of getting information on our benchmark organizations. So this is an example. So this is a sample organization that's benchmarked, and I've called it Company FX. So Company FX is in financial services. And Company FX philosophy and practices focus on talent management and development, provide merit-based compensation, increase opportunities for advancements based on performance. So these are just some of the things that they consider critical to the core of their HR. How is their HR organized? So for them, they split their HR functions into an employee support system, an employee benefits resources, executive services, and talent management. And what does their typical staff look like? Typical staff is self-driven. They have the ability to work in a fast-paced environment. They are global thinkers. They don't just think within Lagos, for example, or within Nigeria, but they think about how they operate in terms of the world. And then they have an understanding of the business. Now, some of these things might seem a bit far-fetched for a small company that has maybe 10 or 20 employees, but the reality is that it is not. It's still the same principles, like I had said. So for an HR function in a small business of, let's say, 10 or 20 employees, they probably have only one person. So how will that HR function be organized? It's now left for you to decide what are the core functions that an HR person must organize, must handle. Are there any functions that are very important that HR person may not be handled but can be outsourced, for example? Are there resources within the organization that can handle some of these HR functions? So that's why we now talk about how line managers can also support HR. And then the typical staff profile. You know how it is when you see some certain organizations, for example, you see a bank. There are some certain banks where you can tell, when you look at their employees, you can just almost tell, for certainty that this person works with this bank, because they have this kind of profile that you can associate with the bank. So that's what we're talking about. So this is information that you can get by asking questions from people that work in the industry, not just necessarily HR people, but people across sectors. This is information that you can glean also from reading up about the companies online, talking to people. And then you can use this to evolve your HR strategy. Remember, you're still at the point where you're collecting information. And then the next thing is to do is SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis is something that a lot of us will probably be conversant with. And basically, a SWOT analysis just looks at the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats that affect the organization. Now, strengths and weaknesses are typically based on internal factors, while opportunities and threats are based on external factors. So your strengths are areas that you do well in or advantages to your organization, while your weaknesses are areas that need to be improved. These are things within your control. You can't control them. But opportunities and threats are external to your organization. You can't control them, but you have to be able to mitigate these challenges. So what opportunities are available to you as a result of you playing in the market or playing in your sector? And what are the potential threats that you can face, within that industry? So for practically all of the companies in the world, maybe not all, but many, COVID-19 is a threat. But for some others, COVID-19 was an opportunity. So you can think about the people who work in medical supplies, who work in maybe vaccine production, for example, those kind of people. For them, COVID-19 was an opportunity. So what's an opportunity for you may not be an opportunity for somebody else. And it's important for you to sit down and clarify that. And then you also need to look at the current HR trends. So what are the HR trends that affect your business globally and locally. Remember that even though your business exists within Lagos, Nigeria, for example, your business may not always, be that small. Your plan might be to expand beyond the shores of Lagos, beyond the shores of Nigeria. So what are the trends that you can tap into? And then it's also important for you to realize these trends, because remember that, for example, if you're going to hire employees, they're going to be hiring employees from the same pool that more established and larger firms would be looking at. So don't just say, for example, oh, these trends are not important to me. I don't necessarily need to adopt these trends. You need to focus on them as well, because other companies, within the sector would also, like now, for example, we have remote work. Government has stipulated that companies should keep, I think, make sure that no more than 60% of employees come to work, for example. So for companies that want to remain compliant, that means that not all your employees can come to the office at the same time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your employees will not work when they are not at work. So your employees can work from home. How are the employees going to manage that? How are you, the organization, going to manage that? Those are some of the things that you need to consider as well. Without strategy, execution is aimless. Without execution, strategy is useless. So we can see that it's not enough for us to just have plans. We must always learn to execute those plans. And now we go to the second part, where we look at the future state of HR. So when we look at the future state of HR, it's important for us to not just analyze the current state, but also for us to be able to create the desired future for our HR and the organization. So the HR professional must review, assess, clarify, outline these issues to determine the future state of HR. And I've just listed 5 issues: human resources role, HR vision, mission, and values, HR objectives, action plans, implementation of action plans, and then measuring the success of action plans. So remember, we've come from the point where we've assessed the stating environment, for example, we've done a analysis, we've looked at the trends that affect our business. We've also done an overview of the company to find out where exactly the company is now. So what we're trying to do is we're working from the point of the past and the current, with a view to guiding us to moving ahead to the future. And that's part of the reason why we also looked at organizations that we could benchmark. Because in looking at those organizations, we're trying to find out what are the practices that we can adopt in our organization that will take us towards the future that we desire. Because remember, HR strategy is about having a plan for our people and our people practices to take us to that desired future that we anticipate. So when we look at HR's role in terms of crafting the HR strategy and in terms of supporting the organizational strategy, what strategic actions must HR take in supporting the organizational strategy? So for example, the HR functions, how must we deploy them to support the organizational strategy? So one way could be to focus on creating a meritorious work environment, where we make sure that merit is the order of the day. Another one could be to adopt competitive pay practices, where we make sure that our salaries and our rewards are competitive across the industry. How should HR be structured to enable the organization achieve its strategy? So for larger firms, they might decide, okay, we can adopt a situation, a structure where we have, for example, generalist and specialist roles. So we have a generalist, and that generalist will be the head of HR. And the specialist roles, we could say that our core functions, HR functions, are maybe recruitment, for example, training, compensation, and then all the other HR roles we think are important to try and fix them under these specialist people. But for an organization that doesn't have that spread of resources, and will probably just have only one person, how do you structure that HR function to make sure that you achieve your strategy? So it also calls to asking for what kind of support, because the HR person can only do so much. what kind of support would that HR person need to be able to actualize the HR strategy? What resources and technical tools does HR require to execute work? So now we talk about resources, not just in terms of people resources, but also in terms of other non-tangible resources. So management buy-in is a key resource. Management itself is a resource. Making sure that line managers support the work of HR is a very key resource. And then we also look at tools. So the major tool that we look at are technological tools. Now, not all organizations can afford to buy HR software, for example. And HR software is a tool that can greatly enhance the effectiveness of HR. So what are the other tools HR can use to be able to enhance its work? So we look at even basic tools like, using Google Forms, for example, or Google Sheets, or using online solutions for payroll. You have a few web-based solutions, rather than deploying a full one that is tied to an organizational server, for example. What specific competencies are required by the HR person or the HR team? So now we're narrowing it down to the skills and competencies of the HR person. What kind of profile do we require that HR person to have so that they can support the business? And one key competency is always business acumen. I'd mentioned it earlier on. The HR person cannot exist in vacuum of the organization. They must understand the business that they're playing in order to be able to support that organization. So say, for example, if you work in a financial services firm and CBN comes and changes or adds a new regulation, for example, the HR person must be able to understand the impact that that regulation would have on their business. They must know how to deploy solutions to be able to mitigate the impact of those regulations. And then finally, which HR responsibilities can line managers be empowered with? And how can they be prepared to assume these responsibilities? How can HR prepare these line managers to take on roles that will ease the burden of HR? Because HR is not just a function for HR people. Line managers also have roles to play in supporting the business. So in areas, for example, like doing a training needs analysis, the line manager is the first point of call because the line manager works with people. In areas, for example, like performance management, the line manager will be responsible for coaching, training, doing the appraisal. Those are the areas where HR needs the line managers to understand work and be fully prepared for the responsibilities. Now we'll talk about developing HR vision, mission, and values. So we've looked at HR's role. We found out, we've sort of sat down and crafted out what we believe HR should do to support the business. Yeah. Now we look at HR's vision and mission and value. So it's important that HR also has a vision for the business. And this vision should focus on the future and HR's desired state. Sorry, that should be for the organization. So a sample vision could be to be the employer of first choice in the travels and tours industry. So that assumes that this business works in travels and tours. That could be HR's vision. Now, a vision is something that you're constantly always aspiring to. It is something that challenges you and pushes you towards aspiring to reach. But then how do we now work towards achieving that? We talk about the HR mission. So the HR mission should focus on today and how HR intends to support the achievement of the vision. So those are the things that HR can do to be able to move closer towards actualizing that HR vision. And I have another sample mission here: developing and retaining them in a conducive work environment that supports achievement of organizational objectives. So when we look at this, what are the key areas that stand out for us? Employ the best people for the business. So that suggests that you must understand the business. That suggests that you must understand the kind of qualities that people must have for them to qualify to become the best people for the business. Developing and retaining them in a conducive work environment. So that also presupposes that you must have clearly outlined what a conducive work environment is. You must identify what you need to develop and what you need to do to retain your people. And then support achievement of organizational objectives. So the organizational objectives must be clear to you, and those devolve from the organizational strategy. And then values. So values define what the people believe in and consider important in the achievement of the organizational mission. And these are just some sample values: teamwork, excellence, meritocracy, integrity. So what are the things that we consider important that our people must have? What are the values that we consider important for them to express in the achievement of our mission? So remember that your vision is about a future state, what you're aspiring to achieve. Your mission is about today and the things that you will do to achieve your vision, while your values are the things that you consider important in the achievement of your mission. Now we go to the critical part. So we've talked a lot about HR's role. We've talked a lot about HR's vision, mission, and values. Now we dovetail into looking at HR objectives and action plans, and this is the crux of the HR strategy areas. I have the list reproduced here as well. A sample list of HR areas. What we now need to do is identify objectives for each of these HR areas, and then action plans required to execute the objectives. So there's a lot of work involved in this aspect, because you need to take each area and then craft out objectives, and then from those objectives, craft out action plans that you need to be able to achieve those objectives. So I have one HR area here, and that's employee records and data administration. Now, the objective I've crafted out for this is achieve compliance in employee records and data management to fulfill employment and regulatory guidelines. So remember that we had done a current situation analysis for HR. So the assumption here is that when we had done that current situation analysis of HR, when we had looked at the state of employee records during that situation analysis, we had found out that our employee records were not compliant. So maybe we didn't have records for all of our employees, or maybe we didn't have all of the records that we required for our employees. Now, labor law requires that every employee in Nigeria who qualified for NYC must have done NYC and must present evidence of having done that NYC by an NYC certificate. So maybe when we're checking the staff files, we realize that some of our employees did not have that NYC certificate. Does that mean that they didn't do the NYC, or does that mean that they didn't submit the NYC? So that's what this objective is trying to capture. What are the kind of information that we should have that we don't have to be able to make sure that we fulfill employment and regulatory guidelines? So as a result of that, what are the action plans that we need to embark on? We now need to outline required employee data, review current employee documentation, and ensure that compliance with employment regulations. Another action plan could be to implement new employee records acquisition and storage system, because we found out that HR records have just been in files. The files are in a cabinet somewhere. What if it's not a fireproof cabinet? What if it's just a cupboard or something? You know, we need to be able to be sure that we have access to those information in an easily retrievable and safe manner. So then we talk about having maybe an tHRive or storage in the cloud. You know, so this is something, an action plan that could address that. Okay, so now it's not enough for us to just craft out the objective and action plan. We now need to go to implementing the action plan. So what are the things that we need to do to be able to implement the action plans that we have crafted out? You know, and basically we're going to break down the action plans into immediate and future term and determine whose responsibility it is for taking action. So still using our employee records and data administration objectives. Sorry, that should be HR area. Now, for the purpose of this, I've said that the immediate term is 3 to 6 months. The future term is 6 to 12 months. Of course, it's also important to think longer than that. So you could have something that would address maybe 36 months or even 60 months, 3 to 5 years, you know. But for the purposes of this exercise, we just look at this in terms of immediate 3 to 6 months and then future 6 to 12 months. So on the immediate, we say that we will review employee documentation and ensure staff compliance with employment regulations. And in the future, a bit longer term, we'll identify and recommend a cost-effective technology-based solution that facilitates the maintenance of employee records. So whose responsibility is this now? On the immediate term, it could be the HR manager's responsibility alone to make sure that this happens. So the HR manager will be responsible for making sure that they review all the current employee documentation, ensure that staff are compliant. For staff who don't have the appropriate records, to submit those records. For staff who don't have the evidence, to be able to provide that evidence. And then the future term, looking at technology-based solution that can store, where we can store and retrieve our employee records. The HR manager can also take up responsibility together. The IT manager rather, can also take up responsibility for that together with the HR manager. So both of them will be responsible for identifying an effective technology-based solution for the maintenance of employee records. Now, implementing action plans is one thing, but then again, how are we sure that we have implemented action plans appropriately? We now need to be able to set clear KPIs for our HR areas. So on the immediate term, we're setting a KPI for the immediate action plan that we have. So the immediate action plan here is review current employee documentation and ensure staff compliance with employment regulations. So on the immediate plan, what are the KPIs? The KPI, which must be measurable, we need to be able to set SMART goals, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. Our KPI for this is ensuring 100% completion of employee records and review. So that means that we need to make sure that all the records, employee records, are reviewed, and then 100% staff compliance. So all employees are compliant with employment regulations. We have all the records from all of the employees that we need. That's 100% achievement. Okay, so our last part will look at this company review, but let me just do a quick recap. So in terms of looking at the future state of HR, I had said that we would look at HR's role, craft an HR vision, mission, and values for HR, and then craft out objectives for each of the HR areas and then action plans, and then set out a plan to implement those action plans, and then measure the success of action plans. So it's a pretty detailed process for us to be able to address each of the HR areas. So the final part is we're going to look at the company review, and I have selected GTB. I selected GTB because it is a fairly well-known organization. I'm sure practically everybody, every working class person knows GTB as an organization. I also selected it because their history, their information is widely available online and easily retrievable by anybody. And basically, I want us to take a look at GTB's business strategy and how HR has evolved their own strategy based on that. So GTB is a Nigerian multinational financial institution that offers online internet banking, retail banking, corporate banking, investment banking, and asset management services with its head office in VI, Lagos. It was founded in 1990, which is about 30 years ago. Now, I've said assumptions because, like I said, this is not information that I have received from GTB themselves. This is information that I have received from research online, from my personal knowledge, from asking people around. So it started with a focus on corporate banking. At that time, they were largely focused on serving corporate clients, organizations, companies, high net worth individuals, people with deep pockets. I remember early on in GTBs, when I first of all started working in the early 2000s, it was a thing of prestige to say you had a GTB account, and the implication was that you had a lot of money because obviously GTB wasn't looking for people who didn't have money. We were targeting high net worth individuals and corporate organizations. But as time went on, they became a universal bank, and then they started acquiring or developing subsidiaries in various financial sectors. So they had an asset management firm, they had a mortgage firm, They had an insurance arm. I can't quite remember exactly how many arms they had, but they had, subsidiaries in various financial sectors. And then eventually around the mid 2000s, they moved from just focusing on corporate banking to focusing on retail banking. And at that time, they said, okay, we are throwing our doors open to retail clients. So if you want to open an account, you can come and open a €0 account in GTB. So what that meant was that they've moved from focusing on just corporate, largely on corporate and high net worth individuals, to focusing on practically everybody. Obviously, the implication is that their customer numbers would greatly increase. To now also serve that retail banking strategy, from having just very few branches in key locations across the country, they started focusing on opening branches in all of the states of the country. And then not just in large cities, but also in second most important cities within those locations. So whereas, they probably had a few branches in Lagos, some in Abuja, some in Kano, the economic nerve centers, they now started focusing on each and every state. So even far-flung states like Zamfara or Bayelsa or Yobe State, they started focusing on opening branches in those locations. And then eventually the CBN came with its consolidation mandate in 2004. And the essential focus then was for all banks to divest from their non-banking subsidiaries. So GTB had to sell off, its asset management firm, its mortgage firm, its insurance firm, and all other non-banking subsidiaries to focus on just being a bank. But what we've seen now is that from that time till now, GTB has evolved further from not just being a bank, but also to targeting millennials through innovation and technology by providing an innovation and technology-driven proposition. So we've seen that there's been a huge emphasis on technological solutions by GTB. First, we started with a heavy emphasis on people using their online banking solutions. Eventually, much more recently, there's the development of the SME banking solution. So you don't even need internet to be able to access transactions on your bank account. You can just use your phone. We can also see that they've been doing a lot of targeting of millennials. So it first of all started with their creation of I think it was GT Create account, where they were targeting students in universities. They went around, did a lot of road shows to capture that market. And then eventually we can see now that, they're doing a lot of work by providing entertainment solutions. So it started with the creation of Indani TV. Indani TV creates entertainment content on YouTube. So they have series, they have shows on business, shows on lifestyle, shows on music, fun shows, all of those things they've done to be able to capture the millennial market. Now, from that as well, they've also gone into creating much more recently the Habari solution. And the Habari solution for them is sort of like a one-stop place where people can come, connect with people, download music, have like a social hub, and still transact business with GTB. Now, like I said earlier on, this is all information that I have gleaned from reading online and from talking to people. Now, for me, I now look at how they have evolved from starting as a corporate bank to where they are now. And I begin to imagine how has their HR had to change to be able to address all of these changes. So for example, you can see where they moved from being a corporate bank to being a retail bank. How did HR have to change? So initially they may have focused on people who fit a certain demographic, people who they felt could address clients, high net worth clients or corporate organizations. But as the retail strategy became on board, they would have to focus on hiring people who can also go into the markets, for example, and talk to market women, not just in English, but also in local languages, in Pidgin. They'd have had to evolve training to be able to prepare people for these kind of changes. They'd have had to adopt reward practices as well to be able to address performance requirements that changed as they changed their business strategy. Now, when we look at it in terms of even now that they've dovetailed into providing millennial solutions, it's the same thing. So obviously, it means that they'll probably be hiring a lot more millennials. It means that they'll be making the workplace more conducive for millennials. I don't know how it is now. Many banks say, oh, you have to wear a suit and tie to work. It's possible now that they say, okay, you don't necessarily have to wear a tie. You can wear a t-shirt on Fridays. Those are the kind of practices that organizations will adopt as they make the organization more millennial friendly. It also means that they'll be putting more and more younger people in greater positions of responsibility and involving them more in decision making, because they realize that you can't just say that you're serving a millennial market without listening to the millennial voice. So this is how GTB has been, this is how my assumption about how HR and GTB has been able to address GTB strategy every time that strategy has evolved. Okay, so in conclusion, the HR strategy does not have to be an afterthought for any organization, big or small. At the beginning of this webinar, I first of all started by saying that many leaders in small and growing companies don't really think HR is that important, because for them, it's about survival. It's about bringing in money. I just need to bring in money. I need to sell my products or sell my services. I need to earn income, and I just need to pay salaries. We can think about all the HR bits later. But then the reality is that it's important for them to also think about the HR bits now, so that they can achieve the kind of results that they want to achieve. So HR should not be an afterthought. HR should be something that is placed front burner within the organization. An organization's HR strategy should evolve with its business strategy. So I started the example of GTV, for example, and my assumptions about how GTV's HR strategy has evolved with their business strategy. So strategy it's not static. It's something that constantly changes. The fact that you sat down and had a strategic plan for the next 5 years does not mean that in 5 years' time, does not mean that in 3 years' time, rather, you don't need to make some adjustments, even within 6 months. So for example, look at COVID. Every organization sat down last year, did strategy sessions, came out and tweaked their strategy for this year and said, oh, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to attack the market. These are the kind of resources that we need. This is what we're going to do. And then by March, COVID came and rendered all plans and strategies useless. So people would have to have gone back to the drawing board and say, what are the things that we can tweak? But you can imagine for organizations that didn't have an HR strategy, how would they even respond to the challenges that COVID brought, for example? Because they were not prepared. When you have a strategy that you can work on, you can say, okay, previously we had said that this year we are going to be more, we're going to adopt a greater CSR objective, for example. And because we're going to adopt a greater CSR objective, we're going to need our employees to be able to support those CSR objectives. When you didn't even have that plan in the first place, how do you know what areas to tweak? So they probably had said, for example, oh, we're going to go out and teach students in schools. We're going to get our employees to go out and teach students in schools. We're going to get them to mentor students in schools. But now schools are not even open. So how does the organization now tweak that corporate CSR strategy to still be able to meet its educational objectives? So those are the kind of things that we're talking about. And even as the organization tweaks that strategy, how does HR support the organization in the achievement of that CSR objective? The HR professional has to constantly keep abreast of the business and all variables affecting it in order to ensure relevance of the HR strategy. So if there's one thing I've said over and over, is that the HR strategy cannot survive by just being an HR person. That HR person must understand the business that they are operating in. Because if you do not understand the business, you cannot provide a solution to address the needs of that business. So when there are regulatory changes, when there are industry changes, when there are issues in the market, the HR person, because they have a knowledge of the market, because they have a knowledge of the business, is ready to be able to tweak that HR strategy to be able to address those changes. The HR person also has the role of advising management in the execution of these strategies. So it's important that they keep on their toes to understand this business, to understand how the changes in the business will affect HR and be able to respond appropriately. So I'll just provide a quick recap. It's first of all started by looking at the SME sector. I focused on how important the SME sector was to the country, noting that the SME sector provides and can provide more jobs for more and more people. So we look at unemployment in Nigeria now. If we had a lot more a lot more SME companies, and if a lot more of those SME companies were properly structured, there's a potential that they could be employee generation. They could provide employee generation opportunities for the country. We could have more and more people taking out of the job market. And then from there, we also looked at what strategy was. We defined it as a plan of action, basically. We moved from there to talking about HR strategy. And I noted that HR strategy is simply the plan of action that addresses the people and people practices of the organization and how those people and people practices can support the achievement of the organizational strategy. Then we looked at crafting the organization HR strategy. And I noted that we look at that in two ways, in terms of assessing the current state of HR and the organization, and then also assessing the future state of HR and the organization. And we looked at things like, what industry does the company play in? How many employees do they have? How long have they been in existence? What is the business of the company? We looked at the operating environment, the need to conduct a SWOT analysis, the need to also identify the current trends, the current HR trends that affect the organization. And then we moved from there to looking at the future state of HR. So what is HR's role? How can HR support the organization to be able to craft an HR that will take the organization to its next level? So what are the skills required of the HR professional? How should the organization be structured? What are the things that the organization needs to put in place in terms of resources and tools to support the achievement of HR in fulfilling the organizational roles? We also looked at the need to be able to identify the current state of the HR areas. What are the issues with the HR areas? Where are there gaps? Where are there issues that need to be addressed? And then from there, we looked at the need to be able to craft objectives and action plans that will address the gaps and the needs that we found with the HR areas. And then when we have now crafted objectives and action plans, we also need to be able to implement those action plans. And then we look at it in terms of implementing the action plans, whether on the short term. The short term I defined as 3 to 6 months, and then on a longer term, which I defined as 6 to 12 months. But then it's also important that we need to look at it beyond 12 months as well. And then when we have outlined our action plans, we have outlined how to implement those action plans, we need to remember that what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So we need to be able to set KPIs so that we can measure the success of our action plans. And then to wrap it up, I presented GTB as a company in review. I spoke about how I believe the business strategy has changed over the years since they started 30 years ago. And I've also noted how I believe HR has had to support the organization in the achievement of its organizational goals. I'd like to thank everybody who has been a part of this session for being here, and I believe that we have all learned something. And I'll just hand over to Jide so that we can take questions.
Thank you very much for that fantastic presentation. It was detailed, it was practical, and generally awesome. Thank you so much for sharing from your wealth of experience and the depth of knowledge that you have about SMEs. Thank you so much. Let's get some feedback, let's get some reaction, and of course, questions. And now we have one question already. Please send in your question using the Q&A session.
Okay.
And then also let us know how the session was. Okay, there's one reaction here from Peter Alabi, who says, wow, power-packed session. Very informative. Thank you, sir. Chama says, very insightful. Thank you for your feedback. Please send in your question. I'll take the first question from here. Elizabeth is asking, how can one effect pay benchmark for a micro business?
So like I said earlier on, you need to identify the organizations that you want to benchmark. So those organizations would be your peer organizations, companies exactly like you in the same situation like you. but not just those ones as well, companies that are also ahead of you. And you now need to find out how can what are the kind of pay practices that they adopt that you can adopt or you can begin to initiate. So pay practices not necessarily just considering salaries alone. Now, there are other things that you can provide that can support your salaries. Because, for example, you might not be able to pay what some other more established firms pay, but you might be able to provide some other incentives or benefits that your employees can latch on to be able to make up for that shortfall. So some creative things that can be done, for example, could be that maybe you could offer a work from home from one day, for example, or you could offer a telephone allowance, for example, offer credit, or offer meals in the office, lunch every day, or lunch once a week, or lunch twice a week, or something. There are creative ways that you can look at how to be able to address those disparities, so that at least, even if your employees don't earn as much as other more established companies in the industry, there are some other areas that you can bridge that gap. I hope I've answered that question.
Yes, thank you for your response. Just want to quickly acknowledge those that are joining outside Nigeria. Thank you for joining. You might notice that most of the examples are Nigeria-centric, but I want to believe that the principles are universal. And our realities here might not be so different from yours, so they are applicable as well. So just more feedback here. Juliet says, yes, very practical tools. Any practitioner who go by these steps will never go wrong. Thank you so much. Adeomi says, thank you for an insightful session. Elizabeth says, great session. Sam says, thanks, Bubemi. Quite a detailed and comprehensive session. Thank you very much. Let's have more questions, please. Bernard says, such an insightful session. Thank you so much. Please share the recording and presentation. Yes, you get the recordings after the end of the program for those who pay that the small fee. The details is in your mail. We'll also be sending a follow-up mail after the end of the program, so you can get that. And all the slides that have been shared by the speakers, you also get that as well for those that we have permission to share. So you get that as well. Okay, another question here, quickly. Adedoyin is asking, what happens to small scale businesses that are not as big as GTB in terms of having good HR structure? I'm not sure I understand that. Ubemi, do you?
Okay, let me answer that I think is required from my understanding. Okay, so like I said earlier on, having an HR structure is not necessarily the preserve of established firms. Every single company, whether you have 5 employees or 10 employees, or 100 employees or 1,000 employees, should have some sort of HR structure. The whole idea is that, remember, we spoke about in terms of the future state of HR, defining HR's role. So in your small organization, what do you need HR to do? What are the important things that HR must do? Now, when you have outlined those things, you now ask yourselves, what are the things, if you have an HR personnel in-house, for example, what are the things that HR personnel can do? Do you need to invite support from a consultant, maybe, for example, to support the achievement of more strategic or more technical areas of HR? Or is there somebody else in the organization that can take up some additional aspects of HR to support the work of HR? So say, for example, payroll management. You might not want your HR person to handle payroll because there are a lot of other things that HR person can do. So you can say, okay, let payroll sit with finance, but HR can have oversight or supervisory responsibility to the preparation of payroll. You understand? So payroll might be prepared by finance, but still needs to be approved by HR. Basically, what you're trying to do is find out what are the critical HR roles that you need to address and how you can manage those roles. So for a small business, for example, and some of these things are not things that you need to continue to do constantly. For a small business that says, okay, let's do a competency plan, for example, you might not need your HR person to do that competency plan, because that HR person might not be equipped to do a competency plan. You could farm out that responsibility to a consultant, and then the consultant does the competency plan and comes and sits with the HR person and puts them through, because the HR person is the one who's going to have to implement that competency plan. So the whole idea is just to realize that at the end of the day, it's not necessarily, there are creative ways that you can use to address whatever needs that you have. It's not everything that you need to pay for. Sometimes, even as an organization, you can do a trade by barter and say, you HR consulting firm, we can provide you with XYZ if you provide us with this HR service. You know, at the end of the day, you've exchanged value, you've not necessarily exchanged money. So I hope I've addressed that question.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, still waiting for, we still have time for more questions. This is time to bring out all the questions we'll be asking as regards one-man business, or the earlier questions about the SMEs where you work. Let's get all our questions answered here. If you're joining via YouTube, please, you can send in your questions using the chat box and we'll take them from here. Right. Barry says, thank you for the insights. You're welcome. Thank you once again, Bubemi, for pointing out so much value. Yes, so much value. I'm not sure how much we'd have had to pay if we had to consult for this, but thank you so much. Okay, we have a question here for Adewumi. When you say an organization isn't structured, what are the missing elements?
Okay, structure just basically means like having a guide, knowing who does what, having a plan of action for all the various aspects of the organization. So, for example, in an organization where, and this is recourse to HR, for example, is there an organogram? You know, the organogram clearly sets out the reporting lines across the organization. So it may not necessarily even be a hierarchical organogram, it could be a flat structure where you have people reporting to themselves on maybe like a team basis, for example. You know, and then even within that, having the organograms, people knowing who reports to who and who does what. You know, are people clear about what they should do in terms of roles and responsibilities? You know, do they have a job description that clearly states what their work is, what they're expected to do, what kind of competencies they should have to do that job, you know, what kind of experiences that they should have, you know, are there clearly outlined performance expectations? Are there clear information as to how performance will be managed? Are there clear dictates as to outcomes of good performance, bad performance? It's basically, you know, enhancing predictability across the organization. That's what we mean when we talk about the organization being structured. You know, people should know what will happen, or what should happen, or what they should do, or when they should do it. You know, everything should be clear. It's not a situation whereby we say, oh, we need somebody to do X, Y, Z, and people are not sure who is supposed to do it, or somebody does it and he's not sure what's supposed to happen after that. You know, you just basically want to add a bit more predictability to the execution of work.
Thank you very much for your response. Okay, any more questions before we wrap this up? It's been an exciting learning session here. Just one feedback from YouTube says, from Obaseki Samuel says, detailed presentation. So what I'm guessing here is that you've answered all the questions with your presentation.
Okay.
So that's fantastic job. As a reminder, the next session is starting about over an hour from now at 3 p.m. West African time. We're going to be looking at acquiring talents that fit. The speaker for that session is Bosum Bankonde. So if you can, please plan your schedule to join. It's happening in over an hour. So you can go have lunch, depending on where you are, and then join us again for that session. Please take note for the attendance code for this session displayed on your screen. For those that want a certificate of completion at the end of this program, and also for those that want to claim the recertification credits. Of course, this and other benefits comes at a small fee. Details in your email, the welcome mail that was sent to you. This particular session was pre-approved for 3 business credits towards the SPHRI certification from HRCI. So without any other further question, I think we'll call it a day here. Thank you once again for joining, everyone. Thank you, Bubemi, for sharing such practical steps to help SMEs build their HR structure here. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Any final words before we sign off?
Okay, maybe I'd just like to say that, you know, some of the things that I'd said, I'd just like to reiterate. HR people need to understand that they are not just HR people, they are also business people. So it's important that you understand the business. I think I must have said this like a million times today. It's important that HR people understand the business so they can properly support the business. You know, one reason why a lot of, maybe not a lot, but one reason why some HR people get sidelined within organizations is because they don't understand the business, you know, and management does not see them as, management does not even know that they need to understand the business, and management does not know that they keep excluding them from some of the opportunities or the seats at the table because they don't understand the business. So it behoves on the HR people to understand the business, you know, so that when management says, oh, we need to do X and Y to bring in more income, or we need to look at our books or our profits or this or that, the HR person is quite informed about the business, to be able to render an opinion, and then also render an opinion about how that affects the HR practices. And then, like I said earlier on as well, irrespective of what size your organization is, having an HR strategy is very important. Structuring your HR is very, very important. It's not enough to say, oh, we're just a small business, 5 people, 10 people. You need to be able to put in the structures, you know, because you need to be able to make your practices more predictable, so that even the people that work with you will have a sense that they're working in something that, you know, has a long-term appeal. So that's it for me. Thank you very much, Adlam Consulting.
Thank you so much. It's been a great one. Then some of the things that we also apply in our businesses as well. So we're looking forward to feedback from everyone that applies this, some of the things shared here on your jobs in your organizations. It would be great to have testimonials and to also share with Bubemi the impact this session has on your organization. So please connect with him on LinkedIn, and also with the Adonam Consulting LinkedIn page as well, to share some of your feedback from this session. Thank you very much. See you again at 3 p.m. West African time.